Welcome, Professor Angela Davis, to Purdue University. It's been a wonderful time waiting for you to come, and so we're so very glad that Purdue has been able to bring you through the Office of Diversity and through many of the Black Cultural Center, to many people who've contributed to your coming. I also like to thank you for coming on behalf of Philosophy Born of Struggle Association. The Philosophy Born of Struggle Association has consistently presented conferences and programs and has worked in your shadow for very many years. So on behalf of the Philosophy Born of Struggle Association, I do thank you for being willing to do this interview and discussion. I also want to thank you for your groundbreaking work and development of the critical resistance program that's a leader in prison abolition and human liberation throughout the world. That brief introduction, I really do want to thank you and appreciate your coming. I also want to say a little bit about your influence and impact on me as a philosopher. When I first came across your work in 1970, I was still a graduate student in philosophy at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Then the next time I came across your work was in 1980 through the lectures on liberation. Those two lectures, the wonderful lectures you gave in philosophy on liberation. And shortly thereafter, I developed the anthology Philosophy Born of Struggle. And you gave permission for me to put your works in that anthology, which made the anthology, to my mind, possible because of your willingness to do that. We were handing out your lectures on liberation, which originally cost 50 cents, but we gave them away free at Morgan State University. So we were handing out your lectures on liberation for many years. When you ran as a vice president for your presidential election in 1980, I went down to Florida to sit in the audience with like 5 other people to sit there and listen to you. I think the rest of the audience consisted of FBI, CIA agents, never do well. But I remember sitting in that audience, they're listening to you. And after you talked, I got up and went back and hitchhiked back to Maryland. Then in 1996, you did a program for the Radical Philosophy Association. And so for many years, I've had the opportunity to listen to you and to look at your work. I remember you at Columbia University in 2012. I sat in the audience and listened to you talk. I remember riding on the bus with you in Boston, Massachusetts, at the conference on women's liberation. Catherine Cleaver was on the bus at that time. So many occasions I've had to listen to you. You've influenced my life and my philosophy. And that's Philosophy Born of Struggle, which is a philosophy which comes out of the idea from Frederick Douglass, one of the books that you've done on Frederick Douglass. Let me give you a word of the philosophy of reform. All concessions yet made to her august claims have been born of earnest struggle. That struggle may be a moral one, that struggle may be a physical one, but there must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without demand. It never did, and it never will. Angela Davis, I'd like to introduce you to the PhD students here at Purdue who are working on your works and working on their dissertation. Amy Pomeran, Tiffany Montoya, Natalie Washington, Jacob Kuhn, Anthony Ramos. Those are our graduate students in philosophy and American studies working on your ideas. So without further ado, I want to give you an opportunity to say a few words yourself, and welcome. And thank you again for coming. These interviews try and ask something about your grounding ideas and beliefs. And in that regard, these first questions come from the students. One of them was Anthony Ramos and Natalie Washington is particularly interested in what social justice issues are important for prison abolitionists today, but also worldwide. What issues are significantly the kinds that we should particularly focus on in your thought today?
Well, I don't know whether I would point to specific issues so much as I would emphasize the importance of understanding the connections among issues. Of course, over the last decades, we've seen a proliferation of social issues. movements that we never would have been able to imagine 40 years ago. The food justice movement, for example, and the struggle against Monsanto and GMO and laden foods, pesticides, Roundup, etc. And those of us who are working in the area, for example, of prison abolition, might not be directly involved in food justice and food sovereignty movements, but it is extremely important to understand the connections. How is it possible to imagine a new society, a society which no longer needs to rely on prisons if we don't also have food that will nourish our bodies and our souls? So I think that what's most important now is to emphasize to use a feminist term, the intersectionality of struggles, so that people no longer have to feel obligated to make one choice, so that they can follow their passions in whatever social justice movements, whether it's a movement that's explicitly anti-racist, whether it's a movement for gender equality, against homophobia or transphobia, or against ableism, whether it's immigrant rights, whether it's anti-war movements, anti-militarism. So all of these are important, but most important of all, I think, is comprehending the ways in which they are all interconnected.
Thank you. Thank you. Another question I had from Tiffany Montoya. What's the relevance of the anti-capitalist and the pro-socialist and pro-socialist activism today? And many wonders, what's the significance of struggling against capitalism on the one hand and in favor of socialism or communism on the other? Is it relevant today?
Well, I would say that as long as capitalism exists, it's relevant to be involved in anti-capitalist, pro-socialist struggles. And of course, this is a very interesting period for activists, for scholar activists, because it is possible to speak out against capitalism and do research that is anti-capitalist in a way that may not have been possible 10, 20 years ago. And I think that the Occupy era, that particular moment, which is a transnational moment, connections with struggles in North Africa, in the Middle East, in Spain, throughout Europe, and other parts of the world. That moment gave us permission to speak out against capitalism in a way that perhaps has not been possible since the 1930s. And I say this as something that is important both for scholars and activists. And certainly all of the social justice movements and issues that I've just mentioned cannot be adequately understood without placing them within a framework that is a framework of global capitalism. So, why is it that there are so many people incarcerated, not only in this country, but increasingly all over the world? It has very much to do with the global economy. It has very much to do with what we call the prison industrial complex, which is a global complex. When we speak about immigrant rights as one of the major issues of our time in the post-colonial era, all over the world, not only in the U.S., but certainly in Europe. But within Africa, for example, in Australia, this it cannot be adequately understood if we don't recognize the degree to which the rise of global capitalism and the creation of these international monetary agencies that have caused the complete restructuring of economies all over the world so that they are based on profit rather than on the provision of people's needs. So yes, it is absolutely important and necessary today.
Absolutely important and necessary. The question from Amy Pomeranian, who's been working on your concept of community and imagination. What role does imagination play in thinking about new communities, particularly the world of abolitionist democracy? What role does imagination come to play in thinking about it? And if we had an abolition democracy, would imagination can still play a role in envisioning our future?
Well, imagination is central. This is why philosophically the ability to critique the existing state of affairs, to imagine alternatives, I think the whole notion of an alter politics is very important here. The need to go beyond simply opposing a particularly oppressive phenomenon, but imagining alternatives. And so with prison abolition, we say that it is so important to imagine a social landscape that does not depend on incarceration, but rather one that would find ways, positive and productive ways of addressing people's needs and all of the issues that ultimately are responsible for this whole era of mass incarceration or over incarceration. Imagination is a central element of critical theory. It's not only important to criticize that which is, but to imagine possibilities that move beyond that which is. And of course, if one looks at the history of social movements, one sees that imagination has played a central role. We'll be observing the 50th anniversary of the Black Panther Party next year, 2016. And since we've begun to observe all of these anniversaries since 2013, 1863 and so forth, we should really think about 2016. And of course, when one looks at the fact that Bobby Seale and Huey Newton decided to do something which many people thought was absolutely insane, but they didn't rely on the old tactics and strategies of movements. They decided to go further and to follow their passions and follow their imagination. And I think this is an important lesson to especially young people today who work and think on the shoulders of those of us who've been around for a while. But it's their responsibility to go further, to go elsewhere, to imagine new paths.
New paths, new possibilities. That's for certain. The last series of questions has to do with hope. When you first began writing in those lectures, those wonderful lectures on philosophy of liberation, you were doing philosophy. You've been studying under Herbert Marcuse, and you've developed your own way of thinking about what counts as liberation. Your suicide doesn't allow you to continue to participate, so it's not really a protest project. It's, you have to be here to face up to this struggle. But in the face of such horror, you still have to have hope. So if you were returning to your sort of philosophical bases, what gives you hope? You've managed to stay consistently in front of our thoughts for generations. What gives you hope? How is it possible? Where does that come from? What's the philosophy that gives you that indomitable spirit?
Well, of course, I always go back to Gramsci, who talks about even though there may be pessimism of the intellect, there always has to be optimism of the will. So sometimes you combine optimism of the will with pessimism of the intellect. I don't know whether there's any alternative. So for me, hope has not so much been a state of mind that I've had to strive for. It has been precisely what is produced by communities of struggle. And of course, your long-term project, Philosophy Born of Struggle, that philosophy can only generate hope. If it does not generate hope, it is useless. And I think perhaps it is important, especially during this era, to emphasize that for which we are hoping will not necessarily arrive immediately. And so the struggle is protracted, but also our aspirations have to have a protracted character, so that we have to be able to imagine how others who may not yet be born will benefit from the intellectual work and from the activist work that we do now. And particularly within this capitalist society where everything tends to be commoditized, where we tend to develop desires that require instantaneous fulfillment. We have to work on developing a category of hope that is about long-range hope.
Long-range hope.
Exactly.
Okay. Before ending, and thanking you so much, I'll ask my graduate students if they had any particular things that they would like to say in a welcome or a curiosity or an expression. Amy?
Hi, thank you for coming. Yeah, you've said, I mean, there's a lot that you said, and I have a million questions. I will try to keep it down to one, though. So when you talk about this protracted kind of trajectory for hope, I mean, do you ever see it where there's an end, right? So we reach what we're, the goal, and then from there, I mean, the struggle stops, or the idea of liberation then ceases to be useful anymore. Like, you know, we reach a goal, and then from there on, we don't need to continue on with the struggle, I guess would be my follow-up question.
I don't think so. I think that the whole notion of a particular point in time where all our dreams are fulfilled is sort of anathema to the whole notion of liberation, which I see as becoming larger and more capacious as we struggle. And certainly, as someone who's been around now for quite a while, I can see the extent to which our notions of freedom, our notions of liberation have expanded over time. And why cannot we imagine this happening indefinitely? So I think that is what is really exciting, the possibility of an ever more capacious idea of liberation.
Hi, thanks for coming. I welcome your words and think deeply afterwards. But my question is more of what this philosophy born of struggle is about, the connection between philosophy and struggle. Clearly, one must philosophize and be in the struggle in order to connect your words and your ideas and your thoughts to what is going on in reality. So when it's disconnected, there's an issue. But what about the other way, when you're in the struggle too deeply that you don't have that space to imagine? Do you see any issues there? Is that something we have to? Is that the tension? Is that the problem that we always have? Because I'm also myself community organizing. It's like, what happens when I'm struggling too much and I forget about my studies, right? And I get disconnected that way. And I don't know. I guess I want your thoughts on that.
Well, I actually think that it may not be so helpful to separate the formal study, from the activism, because I think that knowledge is being generated even when you may not be aware of it through your practice. And so what I would suggest is rather than thinking about thinking over here and acting over there, take some time out for reflection. As you are involved in your community activism, we often don't give enough credit to the fact that there are different venues for the production of knowledge, and certainly struggle is a major venue for the production of knowledge. And think about how to connect that with what you're studying at the university. And I still think that we have a long way to go in terms of making connections between those modes and venues of producing knowledge, so that if we are academics, we learn how to acknowledge what comes from non-academic places. And certainly many of the ideas that go into, I can talk very specifically about critical prison studies, which is an interdisciplinary field that brings together, philosophers and people in literature and history and sociology, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the major challenges for that emergent field is to recognize the role that prisoners have played in the production of the field itself, and not to forget. So that would be my challenge to you.
I want to thank Professor Davis for coming to Purdue, and I'm going to thank all the organizations that participated, the Black Culture Center, the Office of Diversity, Student Centers, Vice Provost's Office, Afro-American Studies Program, the Department of Philosophy. I'd like to thank all of them for participating and aiding the possibility for your coming to Purdue. We stand on the shoulders of great men, Ida B. Wells Barnett, Maria Stewart, David Walker, Henry David Thoreau. The struggles that we get to think about, and having you in our presence has enlightened us and enriched us in ways that I can't even imagine. So in ending, I again like to thank all of our graduate students, and I'd like to thank the Purdue audience for bringing Professor Davis to Purdue University.
Thank you.